you about an extremely cool bike. And I am not generally a fanboy of Honda, but I've been thinking about buying a couple of bikes. And one of the bikes I'm thinking about buying is the Honda RC51, otherwise known as the RVT1000R. But nobody goes by that name. Everybody just calls it the RC51. One of the things I'm finding on the marketplace is that they tend to hold their value. And they're extremely rare, and people get them and abuse them. It's not so much that they use them for racing, even though this is a replica racer. Everybody that I've known that it's owned a RC51 has dropped it. It's one of these bikes that is extremely extreme. It's uncomfortable, it doesn't sip gas, it's not the fastest bike, but it is one of the coolest bikes. And let me tell you why it's one of the coolest bikes. This bike is extremely old. We're in 2020, and this bike looks contemporary, and it looks amazing still. It's a V-twin, a 1000cc V-twin from Honda. An extremely rare thing to find. It's amazing looking. And the best thing of all, if you're like me, is that the sound is incredibly awesome. This is one of the best sounding motorcycles you can possibly get. If you have the factory exhaust, it doesn't sound as good, but it still sounds amazing. But if you get an aftermarket exhaust, this thing sounds like a reliable Ducati. When Honda made this, they wanted to increase the Ducati using a V-twin. But word on the street was that it was slow and sluggish. I think everybody loved the look. But when you look at the contemporary bikes of the Honda RC51, like the R1 and the GSX-R, they look aged compared to the RC51. There's something extremely classic about the shape of the RC51. It still holds its looks, and it's a very attractive bike. The engine is a 999cc dual overhead cam V-twin unit with fuel injectors and 4 valves per cylinder. It had an aluminum frame, and the RC51 was a racing superbike that benefited from the gearbox sprocket stage for street use. Factory RC51s were highly geared for top speed performance, and its top speed was around 164 miles per hour. And a lot of people claim 177 miles per hour. But when you compare it to the Honda Blackbird that only had 174 miles per hour, and this was a V-twin superbike, this would make a great bike to talk around the bar at the end of the day. But on the street, this was a very different bike to ride. I remember riding with a lot of riders with the RC51, and there wasn't many. A lot of people prefer the 600cc sport bikes. And people could literally ride the 600 superbikes much faster than they could the RC51. The RC51 was interesting because it made great power because of the V-twin engine. You could be in any gear and the bike would just carry you out at corners. But the 600s were just as fast. And in the world where everybody is interested in top speed, the RC51 never won any awards. There were 600s and 1000s that were much faster. The R1 and GSX-R 1000 were much faster than the RC51. And a lot of people didn't buy the RC51 because of that. They never saw it as an interesting bike. They saw it as a slow, heavy bike that a 600 could literally outpace it in the corners. And that was true. But the RC51 now is still way cooler than a lot of the sport bikes coming out of Japan and Germany. Now, if you had the money and you wanted to modify the RC51, there were so many changes that you could do to this bike to make it a crazy, high-powered, 180 horsepower motorcycle. But a lot of people didn't do that. A lot of these RC51s landed in the wrong hands, and a lot of guys that were doing stunting thought that the RC51 was a great bike for that, only to find out that you would starve the cylinder if you were to do wheelies for a couple of miles. it wasn't the bike for stunting. And a lot of the bikes that are now in the used marketplace have been dropped, and the plastic for this bike is extremely rare and extremely difficult to find. And oftentimes I've seen these go cheap because the owners decided at one point that it was a great thing to do a beautiful flame paint job with skulls and completely ruined the look of the bike. The RC51 is a great street bike and a better track bike. If you have the skills to ride this bike well, it's going to reward you. And it's an extremely rewarding experience as a street rider to have that V-twin under you and having such a broad power band. One of the interesting things about the RC51 is that the speedometer and tachometer were ahead of its time. They were fully digital and very polarizing when it first came out. And nowadays, you see that echoed in a lot of the Honda products. Take the S2000, for example. It has that quality to it. And it's something that at the time when I saw the RC51 style, I did not like it because I was used to the analog type of speedo that you would see on a standard motorcycle. But now, looking back, I just come to understand that Honda just knows how to build extremely nice bikes. They do a great job, and they are often I'll go on group rides in the summertime 50 years with, instead of looking just dozens of guys down the line on all sorts of motorcycles, from the top of the line BMW sport bikes, the Suzuki 1000 RRs, to all the latest adventure bikes. Sometimes I'll see an RC51 and I just wonder who this person is, because it fully stands out. All of this time, 20 years ahead since it came out, it is still an amazing bike. And when that guy parks that motorcycle at the end of the ride, or when he fills up, because he's gonna have to fill up because he's got a crazy small tank and it just guzzles gas, everybody stares at that bike. It's such a awesome looking bike, but it's not the bike that you would want to keep as just a one motorcycle thing. It's a leisure sort of bike. It puts you in a pretzel-like position, so it's not the most comfortable thing in the world. It's a race bike. And one thing I don't like is that when people buy the RC51, they want to change it into something like that's more touring. Leave the RC51 the way it is. Stop adding skulls and like painting skulls on it. Stop changing the plastic. Stop painting it. It is perfect the way it is. The color that it came from the factory is what you want, especially for resale. A lot of people forget that resale is important in a motorcycle. And the RC51, as soon as you paint it, it's going to look like crap. Don't do it. If you can get a RC51 at a decent deal that still looks extremely stock, the earlier ones are actually more sought after than the blacked out ones. It's worth getting and keeping for a very long time. This bike is built so well and the engine is so good that it's just going to keep lasting and lasting. There's a reason they're still around.